This is episode 5 of the Growth Tigers podcast. Hello everyone and welcome to the Growth Tigers podcast. I'm your host Brian Cotter and it's my job to bring inspiring entrepreneurs of Vietnam and their stories to you wherever you are around the world. Today we have one of the most well-known people in the tech startup scene in Vietnam. Since 2012 he's been organizing events, founded and exited companies, and has written over 400 articles about the startup scene. He's been on stage and interviewed CEOs from some of the biggest companies in the region and even got to sit down in a one-on-one interview with Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. Now he's tackling new challenges in his role with Vertex Ventures. Today's guest is Minh Do. Welcome to the show, Minh.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me over.
Anytime. So let's fill in the gaps that I've left out here in the introduction, because I know you have a long history here in Vietnam, and I definitely didn't cover all of it.
Right. So what do you want to know? I mean, I was in Vietnam for about 8 years, and I kind of started out in the countryside, actually, for the first 3 years. And then when I moved to the big city in Ho Chi Minh City, or aka Saigon, I got into the startup scene, started organizing events with the bar camp. And then from there, I became more and more well-known incrementally until now in the Vietnamese startup scene. So, yeah.
So what are some of the things that you did to become more well-known incrementally? I mean, what were some of the specifics?
So I guess for the first phase, I mean, that was about 6 or 7 years ago. I did, for bar camp, I guess I had a knack for doing events and being an MC. And so just from that, I got to be pretty well-known in the tech scene, not startup, right? Just in tech, engineers and stuff. And so when I first started the bar camp, it was about 200 people. By the time I stopped doing it, we were about 1,700 in the audience.
Right.
So it was a big jump. And that was a bit of my marketing skills as well. So the team that we were working with was really good. And then after that, I got into Tech in Asia, or actually around the same time. And Tech in Asia was kind of a journey of interviewing hundreds of people in a very short amount of time, and that's how I became well known in that respect.
How did you start with your writing?
In terms of the tech startup writing,
you weren't a writer per se when you started with Tech in Asia, right? I mean, you had to develop that skill. So how did that start?
I actually was already writing quite a bit on my own, and it was maybe about 8 years ago now that I wrote an article that was like 17 things you should learn to love about Vietnam. I think it's gone now. I don't know where I put it. But that got picked up by Vietnamese media for some reason and got translated into Vietnamese. And that's how I kind of got my first break in the Vietnamese scene for writing. And in the course of that article, I got invited to a lot of blogger conferences in the region. And so that kind of launched me in terms of writing. But I've been writing for a long time. Like, I was writing when GeoCities first started.
Oh, taking us way back.
So I was like really into that whole blogger thing.
Okay.
And Tech in Asia, what really got me and launched me was just, I met a lot of key people early on. And so I started to get a feel for how the ecosystem was running. And I had that tech background doing all these tech events. So that allowed me to kind of understand what was going right and wrong in the ecosystem in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And therefore, a lot of my writing focused on a lot of the negatives and or positives. And so I think that kind of led to articles being very viral.
Okay.
Right. And so when I wrote an article like, 10 things that are wrong with Vietnam, or some article like why Vietnamese people are not doing very good in founding companies, blah, blah. Sometimes I'd hit a chord in my story.
Right.
That would resonate, and then it would kind of go around.
So you definitely agree with the thought that people will either love you or hate you, and that's how you get attention. Is that kind of the idea there, or is that just kind of the way you are?
I think that's kind of the way I am. Where
Okay.
In my writing, I try to be very strong. Right, I've learned through a lot of the books that I've read on writing and the articles I've read that you should be very succinct and you should stick to, I think it was George Orwell who was like, all of his writing has some kind of political and autobiographical edge. And I think that's kind of what I aspire to do, is kind of have kind of an edgy writing style. Whereas in truth, I'm pretty agnostic. I don't really know what the truth is. I don't really know if it's correct or not. But I do take a position in my writing and then go for it. Okay. And so that may, polarize people or not. So.
Okay. So while you were writing at Tech in Asia, you did a lot of other things as well. So what were some of those things?
Tech in Asia, we do a lot of events, right? And the main source of income for Tech in Asia is events, making up to, let's say, like $1 million on an event. Right. But that was the one thing, I tried to make sure that I ran an event every few weeks, whether it be related to Tech in Asia or not, and a lot of different programs around, supporting entrepreneurs. And I think that also gave me a little bit of credibility in my writing, right? If I was just writing, then I would just be an armchair philosopher. But because, let's say, like before I got into Tech in Asia, I was in a company that I started with a friend, which it's okay, but it didn't go great. And then a few other projects. I was in an education startup before that. So I kind of had, tried stuff out already. But my main passion was always community building, which included, kind of bringing people together. And so my network of people in Tech in Asia allows me to kind of, introduce people to each other a lot.
Okay. So how did your work in the community and your community events and Tech in Asia, how did that lead into your current role with Vertex Ventures?
Vertex was one of the main VCs that I was looking at when I was looking outside of Tech in Asia for new opportunities, right? And so Tech in Asia, I'd been there for 3 years. It was like about 7 people when I joined. It was like 100 by the time I left, and so it's quite a different company. And so that's one thing I was kind of looking around, and I understood that from my work as a journalist that the VC world is actually very similar to the journalist world, because you're kind of analyzing broad strokes on the ecosystem, you're looking deeply at trends, and you're assessing founders. So there's a lot of kind of overlap there. In terms of how the community work plays in that, Vertex has a very strong community orient with the Technopreneur Circle. And that's kind of our initiative to do events and a co-working space for new startups. So, yeah. Okay.
And how does that, because that's based in Singapore, and they're also part of the Singapore's, the Temasek Holdings group, right?
Right.
So how does that connect back into Vietnam? If I'm an entrepreneur in Vietnam, how does that help me out? Well, how would Vertex help me?
Well, in terms of that, I would say Vertex, one of my roles here is to look at deal flow from Vietnam and see if there's anything that interests us. But it's also a part of, kind of an extension of what I want to do in Singapore, connecting Singapore to Vietnam. And I think long term, my goal in Singapore is to connect Singapore, Vietnam, and the Valley to each other. And so that comes in the form of, let's say, an event we're doing in October, to more legitimate programs like sending kids into the US and stuff. So that's kind of how that works, more or less.
Is that part of the Vietnam? Was it the Vietnam? Vietnam American Entrepreneurs Network that you're involved in? Is that part of that vision, or is that kind of complementary?
You mean the Vietnam Angel Network, right?
There's a couple of networks that when I was doing my background research on you, that I picked up on. One is the Vietnam American Entrepreneurship Network, and the other is the Vietnam Angel Network, which I'll ask about in a second.
Well, actually, the Vietnam American Entrepreneur Network is kind of quiet these days. They do events maybe once every quarter. And I'm honestly not too involved. I just know the founders, and we interact from time to time, kind of keeping tabs on each other. but that's pretty much it from there. They're kind of doing their own thing. In terms of the angel network, I'm a little more involved in that.
Okay. So can you tell us more about what is the Vietnam Angel Network?
Yeah, that's more about assembling a list and a network of people that are investing at a lot of different levels into Vietnamese startups. So that includes like angels, but it could also include institutional investors. Because the problem that we're going to have later is that there's more funding now than before in stages like pre-seed to, let's say, Series A, but there's going to be some problems at the Series A to D levels. And so that's a unique opportunity for the angel network to kind of help make sure that startups get the follow-on investment that they need to keep growing. So the angel network, basically, we started out doing events, but I think that events are actually not that useful to investors. What is really useful is deal flow, because most of the best deals, they kind of evaporate very quickly. Because let's say in the case of Elsa, okay. They started raising funding when it's within a few weeks or a month, they were already closed up. Wow. And what happens is that the investors all know each other, the good ones will then recommend it to each other, and then it's gone.
Okay. So, is that kind of a unique case though? I mean, and not every company gets that opportunity.
I think most of the best startups evaporate very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so I know you deal a lot with venture capital. I want to ask you kind of the other side, because actually the companies that receive venture capital are actually the minority. Yeah. So what about the rest? I mean, how is the Vietnamese community developing to support them? How can something like the Vietnam Angel Network or the Shield group, how can they help the non-venture capital funded startups? Tough question.
I mean, there's a lot of programs, right, in terms of how to do, business modeling, how to run a technology team, all this kind of stuff. And I think those are where the help is for these guys who don't get funding. But, there's also a reason why they don't get funding. It's because they're just not ready, right? They might be too young, right? I mean, most of these entrepreneurs that I will meet at the seed level, it's their first time. And they're just less investable if it's their first time. They need to kind of die a few times. Okay. I think that beyond that, I mean, most of the time, the best help that entrepreneur can have is that they do it and they fail and then they do it again. And then they have learned something, right? Because the very nature of being a founder is that you're more stubborn than most people. You're stubborn enough to, not listen to anybody else and believe in your idea more than anybody else. That means that you're not going to listen. And the only thing that's going to teach you is failure. So even if you do go through some mentorship program, all this kind of stuff, it may not be that much help. I mean, when you look at the statistics, right, on actual accelerator and incubator programs and what results from them, there hasn't been that many wins, right? Mm-hmm. And even Y Combinator, which is arguably the oldest, it has also produced startups that it's dubious whether or not they will make it necessarily, right? So even Dropbox, right, which is one of the most well-known companies from out of Y Combinator, they're not doing that great these days. Having said that, Airbnb is doing great, right? So I don't know. It's hard to say what kind of help a startup needs or does not need, but I think that's kind of my view on that.
Would you say that since we're talking about Dropbox, I mean that's an exceptional case, and those are both, and Airbnb are hyper-growth companies that the capital really enabled them to grow beyond normal boundaries. There's different models. Would you kind of agree that the hyper-growth model that VCs look at is only one, it's only one way of doing things, and some of these programs kind of treat every startup the same. They all should be hyper-growth. What do you think about that kind of attempt there?
I think that's true. I mean, but there's different types of VCs and different types of theories on, so like there are certain VCs that they only invest in companies that are just creating enough value for their customers and their strategy is not necessarily to get a unicorn or a big company out of it. And so maybe they'll go on to, exit around the Series C or B level, say $50 to $100 million, and they're done, right? And the guy flips it and he goes to the next thing. And then there's other ones that are more like unicorn. They want to make $1 billion or like $500 million companies. So yeah, I definitely think that there's different strategies around that, maybe different views. But the thing about being this only value sometimes is that you will create something that will be eclipsed by the next thing, right? And that's also a danger, that if you are only looking, let's say a 2-year time frame or whatever it is, or you're only looking at bootstrapping your startup forever, then what happens when a guy who has a technology roadmap that dwarfs yours by an order of magnitude? Then what are you going to do? You're going to go out of business, and that's the kind of thing. So, I actually think that in Vietnam we have this problem sometimes in which these guys, they build these solutions that are okay and they do suit the customers, but they have a threshold to their growth, and then they just stick at that level, right, and they're stuck. So.
Okay, let's talk about StartHub if we can. You founded that, and then within 2 years you exited. Can you tell me more about StartHub and what it was and how you built it, how it grew, and sharing what you can about the exit?
Yeah, I mean I don't know if I call it exit. I mean, we sold it, but it was five of us.
That's an exit.
5 of us. It was like me and 4 other engineers, and we had this idea that we wanted to build kind of like an AngelList for Vietnam. And the whole mission was to collect one place all of the startups that we could find in Vietnam. And the great thing about that was that, we had this reputation already. Some of us already knew us. So, when we blasted around to launch and other places in the web in Vietnam, people would submit. So by the time we were finished, more or less, there was about 500 to 700 startups listed. But that also included like everything from outsourcing companies all the way to like product companies and hardware companies. And
right.
Yeah, the story there goes, we kind of let it sit for a while, and traffic was okay. I wouldn't toot my horn about the traffic, but eventually we found an investor that was keen on using it for his own investments, and so then we sold it, because by that time we weren't working on it anymore, and we wanted somebody to kind of take care of the data and the technology that we had built.
Okay. So what was your biggest challenge with that? Because it started out and you guys obviously were passionate about it, and then you said that you had left it sit for a while. So what were some of the biggest challenges for that?
I mean, I guess the biggest challenge for us was that we were all part-time, right? And so we hired somebody to populate and take care of the data and that kind of thing. But pretty much that was the biggest challenge. Beyond that was we were also working with a new type of technology. So one of our colleagues wanted to try out a new language, so we used it to build. We should have actually gone with PHP, but that was our mistake.
What did you use?
Shoot, I can't remember the name now. Yeah, I can't remember the name right now. But it was.
I'm just curious.
It's a language that they use with a lot of science projects now.
Okay. All right. So let's shift the conversation back to you personally. What inspires you?
What inspires me?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if this will answer your question, but I think that motivation is finite. It runs out, and I will get demotivated over time. And so what I do to keep motivated is honestly read books and watch YouTube videos.
Not of cats.
Not of cats. I watch TED sometimes. There's just a lot of videos on YouTube that are very I don't know, I have this strategy around learning, right, in which I will immerse myself as much as I can with all the media I can find about a particular topic, and that will continue to keep me motivated. So let's say that I am trying to learn how to cook. I will read all the articles I can find on all the tips and tricks, and then all the YouTube videos that I can find all the best books that are about cooking, and I'll just focus on that for months. And then that kind of keeps me motivated. I also try to learn new languages. That's the new thing for me. And by continually learning a language, that keeps me sharp. Because it's small, tiny little wins, right? Because when you learn one new vocabulary word and you use it, then it's a win for you. Beyond that, I always read 3 types of books. I don't read any fiction. I only read nonfiction, and it comes in the form of science books, leadership books, and management books, and self-development. I guess leadership and self-development are one piece, but so that's what kind of motivates me.
So why not any fiction? I have to ask.
I know that a lot of people say that fiction and story is where they will learn a lot, but I find that I watch a lot of television, play video games, and read comic books, and that's quite enough fiction for me.
Okay, so you actually do read fiction, it's just in a different format.
Yeah, and I find that books are very condensed, deep knowledge, and it takes you a while, right, to reach a certain understanding or point in a book, right? This guy could spend, or this girl could spend, 2 chapters to finally reach a very deep point, and only a book could do that. And so I maximize the nonfiction time. I'm like, okay, if that's what a book can do, then I want to get the most dense stuff I can find in a book.
Right. Okay. Completely understand. Do you have a mentor?
Do I have a mentor? I guess I have a mentor. Yeah.
Okay. Where did you find them? Where did you pick them up?
Where did I pick them up?
How did you choose them?
How did I choose them? I don't know if I've ever chose a mentor. Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I don't have a mentor in the sense that I have this person that I check in with and then I meet with them and then we talk about my goals and accomplishments. I think some people have that. I don't have that. I just have older people that are my friends that give me advice. And so, that comes in the form of my professor, one of my friends here in Singapore, who I just kind of have it to meet them through interest, and eventually it just came down to shared interests and likes. Okay. I had a lot of different masters from my Buddhist studies days, but that's the whole other thing altogether.
Okay, well, we'll ask you that on a different podcast. Let's talk about some advice. Is there any advice that someone has given to you, either a master or a friend who that's kind of stuck with you and you've kind of go back to it quite often?
I don't know if there's a few. I like the Steve Jobs commencement speech. I'd go back to that a lot in my mind. I like the advice that Neil Gaiman said, that he said that how does he come up with great ideas, and it's through boredom for him. I like that. He tries to get really bored, which I think is good advice for a world now that is full of instant gratification. I think that, when my father passed away, I always, tell people this when they ask me about advice, but my professor advised me to, kind of try to get the most out of it that I can, out of this experience, to not, shy away from the depth that I could find in that. This might be a little unorthodox, but I look back to a lot of not necessarily advice, but insights from stand-up comedians like Chris Rock and Louis C.K. and some of these guys who I think their humor always seems to underline something very truthful about relationships in the world. I always find them to be very true. And
All right, Chris Rock and Louis C.K. mentors of and
Yeah.
So that's a good one. Okay, so that's my last question for you. It's been really good talking to you. For our listeners, how can they keep in touch with you? Where can they find you online?
No, don't find me online. Don't look for me. I'm trying to write and stuff. No, I guess they can check out my website. I think my email is on my website. It's anminhdo.com, ANHMINHDO.com. Most of my info should be there unless I've been editing it. Otherwise, you can follow me on Twitter. It's Ministry with an H, Min, MINHISTRY. And that's about it. Yeah. Cool.
Okay. All right. I'll put all of that in the show notes, and that's about it. So thank you, Min,
Brian.
and I'll talk to you later.
All right.
No problem.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Bye.